Hello, everyone. So I'm very, very happy to be here. Actually, it's my first time at the Code Talks here in Hamburg, and I'm already a lot enjoyed the evening, had very interesting conversations. So I think it's a great place to be for the IT community. Before I start, I have one question, because actually before many presentations that we have seen were very, let's say, one-directional. So it was a presentation, they said it was going to be half an hour, then it's 45 minutes, and then in the end you have, let's say, time for one question remaining. I would like to do that differently. So whenever you have a question, jump directly in, because then we can discuss a topic in the moment where I'm, let's say, talking about a certain item. I would be very thankful for questions and also for interrupting me. Yeah, so let's make this interactive, if you like. First of all, my name is Nils. I'm responsible for IT at ista. Ista is a company you might not have been aware of yet. So I thought I'd say a couple of words. What we are doing is we are active in over 20 countries, installing devices in houses. So usually it's multi-family houses, and our core product is the so-called device to allocate heat costs. So basically, if you're renting an apartment and the building has one central heating, but you need to split costs between the different apartments based on your consumption, then this is the service that ista is bringing to you. At the first sight, it looks like a company which is producing devices, which is, has a great field force in order to bring devices into the houses. But in the end, if you look at it, it's a data company, because the entire product of doing the billing and now also building energy efficiency products is all built around collecting and producing data and then building products on top of them. So for me, how I look at ista, it's a huge data company. And that was also one of the reasons which really made me a fan of the business of ista. I don't want to go too much into detail. It's not just about heat allocation. We are also building smoke alarm detectors. We are doing water metering. We are building all the devices and installing them in order to do repeating of signals that come from the devices to the gateway. So there's an entire science around how to do sub-metering and what you can measure in a household. But of course, from a trend, it's not anymore just about, let's say, doing the billing and doing the metering. But as of now, and in the context that we are in, it's much more about energy efficiency, helping customers to increase the value of a certain flat or a building, to make people aware of their energy consumption and help also to reduce them over time with the help of data. If you look at it, overall, it's 40 million connected devices. That's really a huge number, and you can imagine the amount of data that this produces. At the moment, many devices are being read once a year. We're going now to once a month, depending on the countries, also on a daily basis. If you go into the commercial segments, the data is being fed in a lot more frequently, so that you can see also within a day changes in the energy consumption. But this over time will become much more intensive and much more frequent in order to build really energy efficiency products, use AI on top of them. So there's a lot of exciting things to come. But this is actually not the reason I'm here to talk. What I wanted to do is to talk about Agile at scale. Now, Agile, probably most of you think, okay, Agile, I mean, I started doing Agile 10 years ago. This is something which is completely known in the IT community. Just to have a quick check, who of you is working in an Agile setup? Agile teams? Okay, looks like 80%. Who of you are working, let's say, in a major company? I'm not talking a startup or, let's say, a small IT specialized company or consulting. Who's working in a major company and doing Agile? Okay, yes. And now, Who of you is basically working in a company who's not only working agile, but who has applied the agile principle from A to Z to the entire company scope? Anyone? Very good. Why am I asking these questions? In my personal experience, you often have discussions in companies where you say, okay, we start at IT, we do, for example, SAFe, we test and experiment agile way of working as it comes from software development. It's very natural to be applied in the IT. But most of the companies are somehow doing it in isolated areas. Yeah? So just saying, okay, we do it for one project, we are doing it for one product, we're doing it for one business unit, perhaps. At least that was my experience. And what I want to talk about today is what happens if you apply Agile at scale, meaning for the entire company from A to Z, really thought through and in a stringent way. And I can tell you the effects are mind-blasting. I'm really surprised on what you can achieve if you really not only do it in isolated areas, but apply it across the entire company. But of course, before ista started that journey, especially from the IT perspective, the question was, okay, we are already doing this, we're working agile. What's in it for IT, right? Nothing new to learn. And I think there was 3 elements that really kept people thinking about it. If you go from agile to agile at scale. And the first topic was, okay, actually, if we're very honest, the way that we are collaborating between IT and the business, it can still be improved. Yeah. So that was one of the hopes that are actually moving, especially from an IT perspective, the colleagues saying, okay, can we not do this better somehow? Not just isolated, but let's say on an overall perspective. The second argument that was coming was, yes, we are working in agile teams, and this is somehow going okay, but the feeling was that we are kept out of decisions. So basically, teams have been given a mandate, they work on a specific product or a specific question, but then there was always a side organization where somehow decisions were taken that then reflected back into the single teams. So being right on the table when important decisions are being taken, that was also a hope which was connected to this initiative. And the last one was, let's say, autonomy in the sense that, yes, we want to align. Yes, we want to be very, very close to the business, collaborate, have a joint view on what we want to achieve. But then, let's say, within a quarter, we want to focus on our work. And we basically want to be autonomous in the way that we design a solution and that we solve the problems and the way that we are building software. So that was the third element, which was very important. Again, if you have questions, jump directly in, right? So then we can have an interactive discussion. What I also wanted to point out is that basically if you do this and apply Agile over the entire company, it's a journey which takes multiple years. So in the case of ista, we've started with this in 2021, starting with the discussions, which model do we want to apply, what's the value in it, are we really going for it, yes or no? And then we are moving in waves. Yeah? And in the very first wave, and I think this is also something which is special, ista decided to start at the heart. So it was basically decided to take the headquarter, take all the business functions, take all the IT functions, and transform them as a whole into an agile setup where we have mixed teams between business and IT in headquarters. So not somewhere in Siberia, but there where basically 60–70% of the margin is made. In the next step, we amplified that and said, okay, now let's take it also to other countries, to international markets, and let's there bring IT and business together. And there are still further waves to come. So we are looking still at everything which is sales. How do we include sales into the agile organization? We're looking at everything which is field operations. So step by step, this approach is being amplified and kept to the next wave over the next 1 to 2 years. Yeah? And then we will basically have an end-to-end overall implementation across the entire company and across all 20 countries. So what I want to say is, it takes a lot of time. And everyone is asking the question, okay, but is it really worthwhile? Does it make a difference? And the second thing, besides just saying, okay, it really takes a long time, you have to be patient, you have to have a long breath. It also includes many elements, right? So it's not just about saying, okay, we take all the units and then we make agile teams out of them and then we're done. But if you really want to do this, I think the most important thing is you need to be super crystal clear in your strategy. Because if you implement an agile organization which is steered by OKRs, which is basically taking customer-centric perspectives, which is iteratively working on solving problems, if the strategy is not clear, you're building a race car without a steering wheel. Yeah. So this is super dangerous. So first thing you really need to do is you need to have your strategy clear, and you need to break down your strategy and priorities. You need to decide, okay, what's on number 1, what's on number 2, what's on number 3? What's more important, A or B? And many of you who might have worked in bigger companies, this is not an easy discussion, right? Because everybody has their pet projects, stuff they've nurtured over the last years, which are basically their personal favorites. And then really putting everything on one list and saying, okay, this is A, B, C, D, and after D come the other topics. It's not easy to do. Sounds easy, but it's not easy to do. So basically, you have to start with the strategy and with the priorities. Second thing, and I think this is what everybody is aware of, you're changing the structure, departments, you're going into building squads, building chapters. You have to define basically, okay, what's the nature of a chapter? Which profiles do we expect there? How do we share responsibilities between chapters and squads? So I think that you need to work on your structure. That's obvious for everyone, but it goes on. You also have to talk about culture and behavior. So for example, if you don't align in a company on how do we set goals, do we plan 100% and everybody knows it's easy to achieve 120? Or do we set ambitious goals and say, okay, let's strive for X, but normally you don't reach more than 80%? Cultural change, yeah? So basically, is it rewarded to have a very challenging goal and almost reach it? Or do you have a culture in your company which rewards people who basically place safe bets and then overachieve by 105%, which was the world where I came from, yeah? Talent and leadership. I think this is also super important. Having and choosing consciously leaders and the right talent in the right place is important to make this really a success. For example, at ISTA, we had a huge discussion around chapter leads, so what the disciplinary side of Agile is. And the question is, what do we value? Is it expertise? Is it, let's say, personal formation? Is it keeping people together? So all of these discussions you need to have, and you need to find a clear answer as a company in order to then make this model work. Because if you compare it to a traditional organization where, let's say, leaders are responsible for the what and the how, and on top of that are responsible for the people, you have everything in one hand. If you implement Agile across the entire company, you're splitting up these responsibilities, and then you need to be very clear on who's taking care of what. Next thing, technological enablers. So the Agile organization which we have built is very much centered around autonomy. So we do want, or let's put it the other way, what we don't want is, let's say, teams writing tickets for other teams. Yeah. What you want is you want to have, you build it, you run it concepts where teams are responsible for a certain application or a product they own. They want to have the developers in the team in order to really build the and co-develop the application that they're responsible for. They also want to be able to do the run part of it, right? So they don't want to have tickets being sent to infrastructure and back and forth, and basically one team waiting on the other one. So let's say going in the direction of DevOps and laying the technological foundations that basically everybody has his own pipeline and is able to manage the code and to put it into production, super important for this kind of organization. Processes, obvious, yeah. So if you do planning, if you do basically all the HR, budgeting processes and so on, you need to rethink everything because the traditional way of doing this is not going to work. And then you have governance and funding. So who takes decisions on what? Yeah. Also very important. Yeah. For example, we have a discussion around chapter leads defining technological strategy. So which tech stack do we use? In which language do we code? How do we do integration? What are architectural patterns? These kind of things. But then the what, so basically what are we building? How are we shaping a product? That is all being done by the product owners that are responsible for a certain application or product. Good. So I think second matches, it doesn't only take long, but you have to be very holistic and very complete if you want to make it work. Any questions on this part already? Yes. Yeah, very good point. So basically, what we are doing is we're having a planning cycle which starts from strategy. So basically, we call them themes. So those are topics which strategy-wise keep us busy for 3, 4, 5 years perhaps. And then we break them down into initiatives. And that's something which can take 6 to 9 months, more or less. And the initiatives are being broken down into epics, and the epics are being broken down into stories. So I will show that in a picture later, but we are basically building what we call an unbroken chain of why, so that you can break down from every strategic ambition you have. So for example, develop market X or develop product Y. You can break it down until the story, which is then in a certain squad and shaping the day-to-day work. And the dependencies are managed by organizing so-called annual business review or the quarterly business review meetings. And in those meetings, we do big room plannings where we will have all the squads with everybody in one room, looking at who is planning to do what, and then the dependencies are discussed and resolved. Good. Any further questions? Good. So please jump in. So the big question is, okay, we understood you do this end-to-end, it's big scale, you do it complete for the entire operating model, but what were the experiences that we actually made? And what I have to say, now we're 1 year into the journey, 1.5 more or less, we have experienced this in the headquarters, in the central functions, and what is really observable, if you apply Agile end-to-end, the prioritization topic becomes much more clear. So what we are doing is it's quite extreme. We are basically putting everything that the company is doing, the important stuff, on one page, and we are doing a forced ranking. So everybody of the 6,000 people knows what is topic number 1 that has the highest priority across everything that we are doing. Usually these are topics in the field of, for example, legal requirements that we need to fulfill, or let's say security topics, these kind of things where you say, okay, this is about the license to operate, it's about our reputation. Those are topics which are very high priority. And then we rank them down priority by priority, and we put them into a forced ranking. So in the end, the entire company knows, okay, if for topic number 5, we don't have a complete team, we don't have the money, we don't have the resources, we don't staff team number 6. And this is super powerful because we're actually coming from a world where you have 300, 400, 500 projects running in parallel, right? And everybody is trying to jump from one project to the other and kind of trying to achieve everything and not failing on none. Having clear priorities and really doing a forced ranking is super powerful. The second thing that we are experiencing is the alignment topic. So the question we had before on, okay, how do you manage dependencies? How do you align? If you basically have mixed teams and you do a product by product planning, you get a very good alignment between all the relevant stakeholders in the company. Yes? Yeah, absolutely. So what we do is we do a yearly forecast, not more. There we have basically a discussion around where do we want to be 1 year from now. And then we do quarterly reviews, look at the annual goal, and break it down in 3 months pieces. And the strong ambition is that within those 3 months, we don't change priorities. Because what you want to have is you want to have autonomous teams working focused with fully staffed people on one topic, and not, let's say, doing a planning meeting on day one and then 2 weeks later changing the priorities again. Yeah. So the answer to your question is every 3 months. That's what we're doing, and I would say in 99% of the topics it's working. You're welcome. So that is the alignment topic. Focus. So that was also something I mentioned. Basically, if you have a project organization, you tend to put people on 2, 3, 4, 5 projects at the same time. Okay, special know-how, you have to help out here, but you also have to help out there. What we are doing is that we're really staffing people 100%. So either you're part of a squad or you're not. But we're not doing 70% allocation here, 30% allocation there. And this is also life-changing for many people. Yeah. What we're also doing is we're reducing complexity, so this is observable. It's a bit difficult to explain, but what we had before is that in a typical large organization, you have coordinators. Let's say people translating for other functions. You cannot talk to IT directly. I have to do a requirements engineering, and then I pass that over, and then I give it to somebody who's a bit closer to the web-facing topics, and then so you have chains of people handing over work to other people. And so what we are really trying is to say, okay, let's not have coordinating functions anymore, but we really bring together IT and business directly in mixed teams. And then you don't need any translation between them because they sit together Monday to Friday anyhow. Yeah. So that is also a very, very strong observation we made. Customer centricity, I will talk about that in a second. But let's say consequently asking yourself, are we producing a value that the customer can feel and see and touch? That in the way that you design your teams can be a very, very strong effect to define teams which take the customer perspective. And the last thing is everything around measurements. So OKRs, also something that we know for a long time, but applying them in the right way and say, okay, we don't define OKRs which measure basically output. I have produced so many lines of code, or I have solved so many interface challenges, but defining goals which have outcome, so what's the value for the customer, changes a lot. And those are the topics that actually some are the things that we can observe in day to day. Yeah, and I think and I hope that over the next years, if we amplify the approach, go wave by wave further, this will be confirmed and even strengthened. Yes, please. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So one example I can share is, for example, that let's say Windows 2012 servers are now running out of service, right? That's a typical example. What we are doing is that basically we also try to define those topics by customer value by saying, okay, the value for the customer is to have his data protected, to have, let's say, a secure product that he's using, and then saying that basically being secure and taking care of data and reputation is a high good that ranks high on the priorities. And then we break it down and say, okay, being safe, what does it mean? It means you install EDR. It means you're doing your vulnerability management. It means basically you have your servers up to date. You're not using out-of-life services and so on. So basically, we also, these kind of topics, we try to derive them from a customer value. Yeah. Sometimes you have to somehow do it via a corner, but normally it's you can argue it. Yeah. I've talked lately to a lot of companies who had a cybersecurity issue, and I've experienced it also myself. If you've gone through that experience, I think it's very easy to argue. Yes, absolutely. Good, you're welcome. Any other questions on this? Yes. Yes. It's basically here on customer centricity. Yeah. So basically, customer feedback, user feedback. I mean, if you want to basically user, if you look at internal users, but we really try to bring everything to the customer, which is actually paying for a product. Yeah. But it's included in here, and we already received feedback on, okay, you're getting faster, you're building solutions faster. So these things are being noticed by the customer. Yeah. Mm, I know the effect. I know what you're talking about. It's basically the trend to the 3.0, right? What we are doing is we are, let's say, trying to measure over time. So we are when we do, for example, big room plannings or OKR plannings, we are checking on confidence votes, and then you can see, okay, how confident is which team, and in the end of the quarter, you can also see, okay, has it worked or not? So basically, by creating data around the process, you have the possibility to create discussions and say, okay, look, why not work with the agile coach? The way you're planning your work seems to be too ambitious, or perhaps not ambitious enough. So there you have the possibility to create, and each team has an agile coach which is working with them actively on exactly those topics. But the effect you're describing is there, and it needs to be managed. But my answer would be you need to create data and measure it so that you can have good discussions around it. Yeah. Good. This is the planning cycle I was talking about before. I think the picture is known to everyone. It's quite straightforward. But what is really what I find very value creating is what we call the unbroken chain of why, and that is really to do a planning for your entire company, not only for part of it, but for the entire company, and being able to come from a very, very clear strategy. Yeah, we want to go to market X, we want to push product Y, and then being able to break that down not only to teams or to, let's say, big areas of responsibilities, but to come down to the very story in a 2-week sprint that the team is working on. And to always have this link to understand, okay, what I'm doing today and what I'm doing tomorrow helps to achieve the goals that we want to have, that we want to achieve in 2 or 3 years' time. Yeah, and that's something. It's a learning process. Basically, it's I mean, you're doing all of that in Jira. There you build the connections. Things go wrong. Things are linked wrongly. You have to basically learn this over time. But if you're able to do this, it's extremely powerful because it gives a lot of clarity and a lot of purpose to each and every team. The other thing is, I think you mentioned before customer centricity, or how do you integrate user feedback? If you build an organization, I think it's extremely important to take the perspective of the customers. So really to go through and say, okay, we have a product. How do I get engaged as a customer? So what's basically the customer journey I go through in order to be aware of a brand, to be aware of a service offering? And then to build teams in that logic, putting yourself into the perspective of the customer and building your organization focused on what value does it bring to the customer. And if you apply this stringently, you can go through the entire journey that a customer is doing with you. I get aware, I buy something, so I'm convinced, I'm spending money, then I'm basically getting a device, installations are happening, I'm receiving a service, then perhaps at a later point of time, I have a certain request, I want to change something, I want to get additional information, how is that handled, and how am I retained? And building an organization which is basically completely stringently focused to those steps that a customer goes through, putting yourself into the shoes of the customer and building the entire organization according to that logic. That's also, it does something with an organization. And I think it's extremely powerful. Yes? Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's a bit connected to what I said, that you have also technological enablers that you need to put into place to make this work. Yeah. So one thing, for example, is microservice architecture. So if you're able to design your systems in a way that data is kept in a certain range and systems are not, let's say, one monolithic application which goes across all chains, but you're splitting up your architecture in order to build according to capabilities systems that are then not monolithic but modular and where you can exchange things and which are basically then just loosely coupled. That helps you to decrease dependencies on that. Yeah. But having said this, of course, you have topics which go across, right? If you talk about ERP, just in front of you, there's sitting Johannes. He's responsible for everything around portals, websites, everything that is customer-facing. Of course, you have that in different steps, and we use the same tech stack to do that in different sites. But again, you need to design your IT landscape and the architecture in a way that you try to decrease dependencies. And if you're able to do this, the better the other thing works. Yeah. Yes, please. I think I got your question. Value streamed aligned tribes, right? I can still not hear you.
Test. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have your tribes along the customer journey. And my question was if you have thought about aligning them on value streams instead.
Yeah. We did actually, we started also in this way because ista had a certain challenge that we were treating our customer groups the same. So we had very large customers, like basically companies owning 200, 300,000 flats in Germany. And of course, those customer groups have completely different needs than, for example, I don't know, your dentist, which might own 3 flats in his street. Yeah. And we did start the journey not by going through the customer journey, but by going by customer segments. I would say roughly 80% of the companies start by customer journeys. We did it first the other way around because we wanted to set an impulse in order to shape the understanding in the organization around, okay, we need to treat customer groups in a different way and we need to design products which are different per customer segments. And now that we have made that impulse, we are shifting more towards this logic which is shown here. But in the end, it's a matrix. It's a matrix between customer journey and customer segment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Good. This is just for the reason of completeness. I mean, not every agile team is the same. We have 4 types that we are using. We have the classical squad, the agile delivery unit. So that's typically a mixed team between business and IT and other expertises. They're typically responsible for building new products. So something where you go iteratively, where you don't know the final solution yet, where you basically work in a very dynamic and iteratively optimizing way. And that's one of the, let's say, the typical examples of teams that we are building. I will show a tribe later where you can see how that is mixed, but I think this is the most famous one, right? But we do also have, if you apply Agile to the entire organization, you have typical center of excellence. Yeah, so for example, HR, legal, tax, those are topics where you have perhaps 2 or 3 experts in a certain field which are covering the entire group. And there you're not building agile teams because it's basically the provisioning of a scarce, super high, let's say, specialized know-how that you're spreading. Yeah? So we try to minimize that, to say, okay, as much as you can, let's try to build LOT, CLT squads, but you do have areas with center of excellences and where it absolutely makes sense. Yeah. Then we have lean operation teams. So think of, for example, server infrastructure operations. This is basically not so much, let's say, iteratively optimizing work, but if something breaks, you need to get to fix it. And it's, let's say, teams which are very much focused on efficiency, on making processes run smoothly. And then you have customer loyalty teams, which are very much focused towards serving a customer need, answering requests, but it's a transactional task. Yeah, so it's not like building a new product, but it's more like getting stuff done. And then, if you look at the squads, so the agile delivery units, you have that as a day-to-day organization. But then, by expertise, we have created chapters where people are trained on the special profile. So if you're a web developer, you will be part of a chapter which is called web development, and then you're trained on that capability. But in the squad, you might be working in a mixed team where many different developer colleagues with different expertise are joining. Yeah. This is an example I just brought so that you can see how we are combining these different types. So I took the infrastructure topic. I think that's a bit easier to explain. But here you can see, okay, lean operation teams. So typical transactional, efficiency-oriented tasks. That's what we would call a lean operation team. They're taking care of server, of network, of these kind of tasks. Then we have customer loyalty teams. In this case, it's rather internal customers because it's about organizing support, giving away, let's say, the possibility to have laptops, mobile phones, answer questions in the day-to-day business. So that's a typical customer loyalty team, as we would call it. And then you have squads which have been formed for a very specific purpose. So something where we say, here we are building a new solution. We are trying to take the next step. In our case, this is, of course, further developing how do we build in the cloud? How do we design landing zones? How do we basically set policies within Azure or AWS or whatever you're using? How do you perhaps further develop your on-prem data centers? Enable them for infrastructure as code, for example, these kind of topics. So if you are creating something new, if you're building a new product which is then shared within the community of developers of your company, that's a typical squad task because you don't know where you're going to end up. And you're iteratively building a new product which is then shared, in this case, within the company. Yeah? And then, as I mentioned before, for all the developers in those squads, you're building chapters which go by speciality. So this is where your home is as a developer. This is where you are trained on a certain profile. This is also where your development talks are taking place. But Monday to Friday, the day-to-day work, mixed teams, that's where you work in a squad. Any questions on this one? Or was infrastructure the wrong example? Perhaps. Good. And that basically already, we're coming to the end. So what I would just want to share is what are the lessons learned that we made during that journey. And the first story that I can share is we spent nights and nights and nights of debating, okay, how to cut the organization, what's the best logic, how big are the teams, how do you actually, let's say, optimize your strategy achievement and reflect that in the size and the definition and the mission and the KPIs of the teams. And you can discuss that forever, but what we found out in the end is at some point you just need to jump, you need to start. And then at a later point of time, you will adopt anyhow. Yeah. So what we've done after the last year that we've started, we've already changed, I would say, each time 5–10% of the organization, merged tribes, reorganized squads, changed profiles, sharpened the mission that was defined. So you do adopt, and thinking everything through perfectly in the very beginning, it's almost impossible. So at some point you need to start, right? The second thing I can share is it is an intense learning journey. So for the leaders, for the team members, for the developers, for the business experts, for HR, for controlling, it changes completely day-to-day life. And you need to understand what are the goals that we want to achieve with that. What does it mean for me personally in my team? How do I perhaps reorganize the work that I'm doing? And it's how do I plan? And it's very, very challenging for each and every one, but it can be also very rewarding. Yeah, but don't underestimate the learning effort which is needed in order to make such a thing happen. Then, what I think is really, really quite bold is we killed all projects, 100%. There's nothing left. So either you're working on a product in a squad, 100% allocated, no mix of squad, you're absolutely focused, you're aligned in a quarterly business review, you have an OKR, and you try to build and solve a problem, completely focused on one topic, and everything which is projects, it doesn't exist anymore. It's not planned, it's not budgeted, it doesn't exist in the company anymore. And this is quite bold if you think that we're coming from a world where you have 500 projects simultaneously running and everybody being allocated to at least 2 or 3 projects. Coaching is key. I think this is something which we've also learned. So to get the routines, how do I act as a team? How do I do dailies? What's a good retro? It's a learning journey. You really need to have people super specialized and knowledgeable in these topics and guiding the teams again and again in order to, let's say, get into that mood and also to let's say, apply the methodology in a consistent way so that basically you can also change between teams and you don't have to relearn everything again. And the last one is, yes, please. I understood your question, but perhaps you repeat it for the other colleagues.
The first question was, what were the reasons behind the decision to work with Agile coaches instead of Scrum Masters? And the second question is, I often see in organization only the teams get the Agile coaching, the managers not. And I want to know how is ista doing it?
Yeah. So for the first question, I think this is a bit the question of methodology, right? If you go into SAFe, let's say the methodological guidance on how to learn that and how to coach, you use different names for things which are sometimes overlapping, right? So in our language, it's basically Agile coach, Agile team coach for the specific teams, and Agile enterprise coach for an entire tribe. Yeah, and I think that answers already your second question. So basically, we have 2 levels. We try to have in each team an Agile coach. Sometimes we have to share, so then you have one Agile coach serving more than one team, which is good if the team is already into, let's say, a productive mode. In the very beginning, it's you almost need a complete coach only for one team. Yeah, and then you have basically above that, you have Agile coaches for the enterprise level and therefore an entire tribe, and also the tribe lead, which is the senior management level, which you mentioned, is served by a specific, let's say, profile of coach. Yeah, who's then looking, for example, do you do tribe things? How do you organize across squads, across chapters? How do you, let's say, develop your teams in a consistent way? These kind of things. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes.
So one thing I haven't heard before here. So how do you deal with remote work?
So basically, this is something that we're still trying to figure out what's the right balance. So we do have remote work, of course, like everybody after Corona, right? So we have people working from different places. We have strong teams, for example, in Spain, in Poland. Let's say developer teams combining virtually but living in different countries. What is very important to do that is basically to have the dailies and to have daily touch points and virtual rooms where you can meet. But why am I, let's say, thinking a bit about your question is that we very, very strongly believe that only working together in a virtual way is challenging, especially for new hires, right? So when you come new into a company, you don't know everyone. We do believe there's a value to see each other regularly, sit in the same room, breathe the same air, and work together also person from person. So what we're doing, the answer is we're doing a mix. Yeah, in some teams it's a bit more extreme because you have developers and business experts sitting in different countries, so that doesn't make sense to fly in every week. In other teams where it's possible and where it makes sense, we try to also physically be together in a very routine way.
And for those distributed teams, then you meet, for example, once a quarter, or?
Yes, basically you have chapter activities. That's a possibility to meet. You have the possibility to also, let's say, do joint workshops, do joint reviews. I mean, every team is somehow designing that a bit in their own responsibility. But let's say the goal is that you see each other regularly, also physically, and that you still have the possibility to also use home office, let's say half of the week or something like this. Yeah, but we're still looking a bit for the right balance. That's why I'm thinking a bit about the answer. Yeah. Further questions? Comments? Good. Then we made it exactly on time. Thank you very much.